Well, good morning. This is Plant Smart Living with Farmer Fred. I'm glad you could join me today. Today I wanted to take a few minutes and explain to you how I constructed my own raised garden beds here, so you could grow your own food at home. Well, good morning. This is Plant Smart Living with Farmer Fred. Just want to thank you for joining me today. It's end of November. In fact, it's November 30th today. We had a wonderful growing season this year. And, throughout my videos, I did mention about my raised garden beds briefly. Like this one here is 18 foot by 30 foot. Now, a couple of years ago, I never had a wooden frame around it, but I added a wooden frame around this one in particular to be able to raise the soil levels up. And so I have a lot of compost I had added to this bed and also some topsoil. But I constructed this one out of 2x4s and 2x8s. I built the frame, and on this particular one I did add a 2x4 to the top. And I used the torque head deck screws to anchor the pieces of treated lumber down. Now I did use treated lumber on this frame. I also used treated lumber on all my raised garden beds. It was about 10 years ago they took the arsenic out of the wood, so I personally don't have a problem using it. Here, certainly the wood's going to last you a lot longer. But anyhow, let's take a walk to the back and talk about these raised beds. Now, these beds have been here for about 2 years. But before that, it was just woods like you'd see over here. And so I have a small Kubota backhoe that I use to clear the woods out. I have been a contractor for 40 years and doing carpentry and electrical and plumbing, and I've been gardening for about 25 years here. And so 2 years ago approximately I added these raised beds here to extend the garden that I had before. Now each of these sections here are 4 foot by 32 foot, and they're broken up into 4 8-foot sections. And this grade has about 10-15% grade to it, the ground, and so as you can see I had to step it down some or terrace the raised beds. And so I used 2x8 treated lumber construction, and I used 5/4 by 3.5 inch pieces here on the corners and throughout the sides. The 5/4 makes it about 1 inch thick, and I ripped them down on my table saw to about 3.5 inches. But you could also use 2x4s for these support stakes on the outside. Just recently I did a video on adding leaves to the soil and the nutrients that it adds. I had gotten some leaves from a neighbor I was working at. They were cleaning up their leaves, and so I added these to the soil to amend the soil. I actually do use composted leaf mulch on all my raised beds here, and they amend it with topsoil. I've gotten away from using the horse manures because I know there's a lot of herbicides in the horse manures, and even in the cow manures, and so sometimes that can inhibit plant growth. And so with the leaf mulch here, it really works out real well. But here on the bottom ends I had to double the 2x8s in order to add some support. Also, the depth of the bed is another important consideration when you're thinking about building raised garden beds, you know, like greens, your greens like kale and Swiss chard, they normally, and lettuce, they need about 6 inches of soil depth. But most of my beds, I would say, are about 12 inches deep. That would probably be a good minimum depth that you could use. You could also just dig down the soil into the existing soil some too. So say you were just to use 2 by 10s, they're 9 1/4 wide, and so if you dug into your existing soil, and it would give you some added depth to your garden beds. But you can see I still have some cold weather crops here going. The kale's doing really well here, and I still do have some Swiss chard that's hanging in there. In fact, my son-in-law Howie, who is also my cameraman, we love Swiss chard over potatoes, so that's gonna probably be a lunch for us today. And so what I do is I have three sections here, 32 feet long, and the one reason I also like the lengths of these is for irrigation. It's you can run different sections of I use the soaker hoses here in my raised beds, and so it's easy to water your plants. You can just, you can buy some 75-foot hoses and run them up and down the bed. So it makes it easy to set up your irrigation system. Also, in between these beds here, I used this is red shale from the creek that I've used. I have a creek down below our 10-acre property here, and I went down with my backhoe and brought up quite a few scoops and then just spread them out over here. Also, distance between your beds is another important consideration. Here I have about 4 feet in between these two beds here. Some people, I've seen them narrower, but you could possibly go 3 feet, but I wouldn't go much narrower because you want to be able to get a wheelbarrow down the middle or a lawn cart to use in your different garden sections. But you can see I have these side pieces attached here to give strength to the side of these beds. It's simple construction here. It's really basic. Something you could do on a weekend. And if you're a beginner, at gardening, I always suggest that you start small and build off your successes. And so you could just build a 4-foot by 8-foot raised garden bed. In fact, I did a video on that. You could check out on how to construct one using framing lumber. It's very simple construction to build one. And then even in that bed you could put a couple tomato plants and a couple peppers and some Swiss chard or kale, and you'd have enough vegetables that you could feed a small family on for all summer. So in between these two raised beds here I have 8 feet, because 8-foot distance, because in these beds here I grow my watermelons and cantaloupe. And so you want a good wide area for those vines to be able to grow. So you need plenty of room for that. And also, even on this side here, I have another good 8 to 12 feet, depending on where you measure. And this, of course, is my outdoor workstation that I built here. I have a workbench here that I built that we do a lot of our canning of our tomatoes and prep work out here. I spin around here. Also, one of my favorites is I have an outdoor shower that we built here. So that's always a lot of fun to use that in the summer when I'm out here working and I'm all dirty and grimy, to be able to jump in here and take a shower. This water here is supplied from my pond. I have a pump that I have hooked up that I use actually as a to irrigate all of my garden beds here. So lastly, I had this one little section here that I also added. It's about 2 foot by 6 foot. I used 2 by 8 construction here again. Screwed the corners together and just filled it with some compost. Now this past summer I planted some canna lilies. There they get about 5 foot tall, and they just add some nice texture, some nice grace, some color to this area. And sometime in the future I hope to do a video on irrigation. Also how I set up my irrigation system. You can see I do have some piping here that supplies to this raised garden bed. So I just want to thank you for joining me today. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the section below. Over here I do have my red beets under this row cover here. So anyhow, if you have any questions, like I said, just leave them in the section below. And if you have any tips or ideas as far as your raised beds, I would always welcome some new. So I just want to thank you for joining me today. Until next time, this is Plant Smart Living with Farmer Fred.